Maybe, why is it blocking on this page?
About 1 more minute.
Yep, 1 more minute and we'll start.
We are at 68 attendees. No. I think we can start.
Okay, thank you, Fatma. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this brown bag session hosted by Firm. My name is Roderick Norman, for those that don't know me, and I'm the acting manager of Firm 2 in the Resource Mobilization and Partnerships Department. Today's session on resource mobilization principles and strategies is long awaited for and long overdue. We are pleased to provide this in the next series of brown bags that we're offering. And as you know, the brown bag sessions hosted by Firm are meant to provide best practices, lessons learned, and information on impact of trust funds and other initiatives that are going on at the bank. Over the last year, we've done roughly 25 to 30 sessions, and approximately 2,000 bank staff have participated. Today's session on resource mobilization is one that has been increasingly requested, both from internal users and sectors, as well as other departments that are interested in better understanding principles around resource mobilization. Today's agenda, as you see, we'll talk a little bit about what we're going to cover today. And then my colleagues, Jihan and Alistair, will go into the presentation and really take you through what we see as some of the best practices in resource mobilization. Next slide, please. Hi. Jihan or Fatma, can you go to the next slide?
Here with us, it takes a bit of time to go to the next slide. I don't know what. Yeah. Okay. Well, let me just go ahead and start. So the reason that we need this session on resource mobilization is because, as everyone is aware, there is an increasing resource need at the bank to tackle ever-growing issues in Africa. And this is guided by our 10-year strategy, the IOP, and calls to broaden resources at the bank. So as the needs are increasing, the environment, the donor environment, is also becoming increasingly unpredictable based off of the backdrop of the social and economic backdrop, as well as I see a message saying you can't hear. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you, Rod. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Other people are. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. So as the backdrop is becoming increasingly more difficult, just from an unpredictability standpoint, grant funding is going down, as well as a competitive standpoint. Africa is on the radar of many donors, and so our ability to, or our need to be more selective, more aligned, and to show our value add is increasingly more important. Also, that means that from a bank standpoint, that we need to be more coordinated. We need to have strategies in place, we need to have plans, and we need to work together in order to be able to raise financing. And so today's session is meant to help with that. As a backdrop as well for today, we are also going to the board with a new trust fund policy in mid-October, which is the policy will provide more structure around how we manage our trust fund business, as well as it will provide new opportunities from an instrument standpoint and from a vehicle standpoint for us to approach non-traditional donors. And so we're hoping that you can take some of the principles that we talk about today and be able to use that, or that we all can do that working in coordination together. Presenting today are Alistair Charnock and Jihan Hakimi, who are both in Firm 2. Alistair has been with the bank for approximately 2 years now, and prior to that was in the NGO sector, specifically with CARE, where he was raising capital with donors such as USAID, DFID, EU, as well as a number of foundations. In his role as a regional resource mobilization individual, he raised consistently close to $100 million and increased the fundraising by 30% on a year-on-year basis. So someone that is well qualified to have this discussion. Jihan Hakimi as well has been at the bank for I think 5 or 6 years, if I'm not mistaken, Jihan, and has served in the partnership position in 2 front offices, in PIVP, as well as in the financial sector front office, and has also been deeply involved in fundraising. She is a certified fundraiser, certified by the Chartered Institute of Fundraising. So I can think of no 2 better people to provide the insight today in this session than Jihan and Alistair. Ground rules for today, just a couple housekeeping messages. Questions should go in the chat box as they come up, and they'll be answered you know, in the order of that you put them out there. We'll share the presentation and the recording of the session later on. So with that, let me turn it over to Jihan and Alistair. Thanks.
Thanks, Roderick. So bear with us. The presentation is a bit long, but very informative, and we'll have time to also discuss with you, ask you a question live, etc. So we'll walk you through the resource mobilization cycle. It's also called the donor cycle. It starts with the yellow, identification or research or qualification. It's a very, very important, very essential stage in the fundraising journey. It's all about gathering, analyzing information, and it's the base of our fundraising activity. You need to know who will ask and what will you ask for. The second phase of fundraising is cultivation or romance. It should take 60% of your time as a fundraiser, because it's all about preparing the ask. It's about cultivating the relationship with the donor, building it, engaging the prospects, preparing to make the ask. And then solicitation or the request. It's you can see it's only 5% of your time because the cultivation process has already done the hard work. The ask simply provides an opportunity for prospects to support your cause that they already value. So the main purpose of the ask is to listen to the donor. So make the ask and listen to the donor. The fourth one is stewardship. It's all about acknowledgement, recognition, reporting, and ongoing engagement with the donor, because the goal would be to have repeat donors, and without stewardship, you won't have repeat donors. And this is why it's a cycle. The stewardship is ongoing. So identification, let's spend just a couple of seconds here. Why is identification important? Because it predicts which donor are most likely to give the most, likely to give most often. It also informs the communication channels that you should use, the right value propositions to the different segments, the right timing and frequency of asking, and how much to ask for. So a basic understanding of prospects, who they are, how do they behave, and why do they give and not give is key here. For example, let's talk about channels of communications. Communication used with Qatar Foundation will be different from the one used with Japan Ministry of Finance, you would agree, right? So that's why this step is very important. It's about analyzing your donors and catering to their needs at the end. We go to the next slide. So what actions to undertake at this stage? First, identifying prospects, mapping of donors, a database, and we'll show you later on an example, an Excel file. It's the most basic example using Excel. Then qualifying them. Are they able to give? Is there affinity with the African Development Bank or with your trust funds or with our programs? And then access. And then we segment them. So you have different type of segments: prospects, existing donors. You see on the right side large universe of donors and prospects. You have the foundations, the trusts, sovereign countries, and within sovereign countries, you have different segments. You have OECD DAC member countries, emerging countries, China, Brazil, regional member countries, so Africans, or EU countries. And then another segment could be the MDBs, the DFIs, and another one, non-sovereign entities. And within non-sovereign entities, you have so many segments. So why it is important to do this exercise of segmenting? Because it helps you determine how to engage each one and to develop adapted fundraising strategies and options for each segment. So you see the pyramid here. The largest part is prospects, universal prospects, all the segments. Then ideally you go to a first-time donor. And then ideally we want to have repeat donors. So this pyramid should be kept in mind. And then another thing we want to share is key information, first-time donors versus repeat donors. 80% of your revenue comes from 20% of your donor. Just think about it. And this is why it's important to steward your donors. Because donors that have already contributed to your trust funds or programs, they are most likely to give again if you've done the stewardship very well. And we'll go through the stewardship in the next slides. So let's move to the next one. This is just an example. My colleague Alistair will talk about it.
Thanks, Jihan, and good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Alistair Charnock. So just building upon the slides that Jihan has just presented, and essentially to help you with the identification phase, this is something that we often get asked within firm is, which donors support my particular sector, or, where can I go and find out more information about particular donors? So we have some tools that we can share with you to help you with that identification phase, the donor research, the donor mapping. But before that, you need to be able to have a tool as well where you put all this information. So, we have examples of fairly straightforward or basic spreadsheets or Excel databases like the one that you can see. And this is a really useful way of starting out, putting all the different potential prospect donors into your spreadsheet, starting to segment them, by type of donor, the country, what particular area of interest does that donor have, and then also to start tracking your engagement with that donor as well, and which will help develop your action plan. And as Jihan mentioned, the real aim is to start funneling those donors from prospects up that pyramid or up the ladder, so that they go from prospect to donor and then ideally repeat donor. And this is, we can share this type of template with you following this session. The next slide, or the next few slides, are examples of resources available to us at the bank to help you with your donor research and mapping and the identification phase. Some of you will be aware and perhaps participated in some sessions that we've run related to the DevX platform. So the bank took out a subscription with DevX at the beginning of this year. It's an online platform, international development donor resource, and essentially it helps you identify, which particular donors are interested in which thematic area, which geographic area, and it can also help you track funding opportunities that are upcoming. That's a paid subscription, and we can give you details on how to subscribe with the bank login if you don't already. The next example is called Donor Tracker. This is a free resource, and it provides donor intelligence covering the 14 OECD donors, or the largest OECD donors, a lot of which we already have strong relationships with and receive funding from. But again, it's a good resource to see the latest information about those donor trends. And then finally, internally, we have other resources of information about donor funding. So as an example, we have the Trust Fund Finder, and this is also a good way to look at where the bank has received funding from these donors, again, which particular areas. And it's a good starting point for you as you're doing the identification, as you're building up your resource mobilization strategy. Okay, over to you, Jihan.
Thank you. So the second step, so we did identification. The second stage is cultivation. And remember, we said that 60% of your fundraising activity should be allocated to cultivation. It's very key. It's preparing to make the ask, which is only 5%, should only take 5% of your time. So this stage is about building relationship, engaging the prospect, preparing to make the ask. And they're based, or cultivation strategies are based on the information that is gathered in the identification phase. And it refers to methods you will use to build a relationship with the donor. How will you make contact? By email or face-to-face? Or should you ask Adesina to make contact? Or you or your director? How will you inform prospects about your fund or about your initiative? How? So the channels. How will you do the cultivating? So these are tactics, activities. And how will it be achieved and sustained? So result monitoring, evaluation. We'll go through this in detail later in the slides. And so for examples, activities, cultivation activities are email nurturing, sharing articles, sharing annual report of your fund or of TAFDB, social media postings. For example, Twitter, thank you, Canada, for your support to gender, etc., etc. Inviting as a guest speaker, webinars, inviting to advisory board of your trust fund, why not? Inviting them to the annual meeting, to the AAF, to a donor roundtable, giving presentation in the donor country, for example, inviting them to supervision missions. If you have a TA, if you have a trust fund that is already operating and you have a TA operation somewhere, I don't know, in Angola, you can invite the prospect to come with you for a mission. Personal visits, phone calls, peer-to-peer networking, etc.
Okay, so the next phase, as Jihan mentioned, is the solicitation phase. So Jihan mentioned that this might only take up 5% of your time. I think that's not a set number, and often it will depend as well, perhaps on the way you make the ask. If we're writing a long proposal, and perhaps there's like a lot of back and forth with a particular donor, in the proposal development stage, you could argue that solicitation takes a bit longer. And in some regards, the cultivation phase obviously, can blend and merge into the solicitation. But essentially, it's about building up to making the ask for funding, putting in the pitch, and presenting, why your case for support is relevant to the donor. And so there are different tools, different ways that you can do this. You can try and be innovative using, films, media, etc. But often what we work with are obviously the kind of case for support or a pitch document to help us really articulate, why we need funding and why us and why that particular donor should invest in our initiative. I think it's also important just to remember that, many times we'll receive a no or a negative response to our pitch. And it's important not to get, despondent when we receive those no's, and try to have in place, a plan to try and turn that no into a more positive response further down the line. And so it's important to really always maintain open communication with that particular donor, and not just to end it there, So moving on to the next slide, and just focusing on for a little bit the actual case for support. A tool essentially to help us with making that ask. So when putting that document together, or when making that pitch, there are three key questions that we think are important to have in that case for support. So why us? Why the bank? Why a particular fund or facility or project? So make it really clear about why we are best placed to carry out this particular initiative. And that could include referencing perhaps competitors or other actors in that space, and also referencing our track record, so really explaining why we are best placed or uniquely placed to carry out this piece of work and reach these particular targets. It's always important to have a bit of urgency to a request. So explain clearly why should this particular donor be investing now or giving now? Is that related to the external environment, related to the particular problem that we're trying to address? I think over the last 18 months with COVID, there have been lots of opportunities to pitch for funding to donors in that context, and really being clear and articulate about why now, given the pandemic, why is it really important to invest now? But trying to be specific with that argument. And then finally, why you? So why should this particular donor, why is it relevant to them to invest in this fund or this project? And again, this relates back to the identification stage, the research that you've done, understanding your target audience, understanding those donors and their particular interests. And again, one thing we need to bear in mind is that you may build a case for support which is just specific to one donor, or you may build a case for support for one group of donors, like bilateral traditional donors, and then you may have a case for support for non-traditional. So bearing in mind that the case for support needs to be tailored to your target audience. Over to you, Jihan.
I unmuted, apologies for the delay. So in a case for support, we need to build success backwards from our target audience. First, identifying their needs, their interests, their values, and then we develop the case for support. And so there are many theories, and one of them, or one of the findings actually, that the key emotions that drive an action, like writing a check, donating, are 6: happiness, surprise, anger, disgust, sadness, and fear. So if you're able to reflect one of these in your case for support, then it's a win. Also, the idea of synthetic family. When you approach a donor, when you solicit his, her support, you need to be inviting them into your synthetic family, or maybe family of climate change mitigation, family of gender and economic empowerment of women, etc. You need to reflect that in your case for support and your comms in general. And then the you, using the you in your comms in the case for support. You, thanks to you, or with your support, it's very, very important. And then best practice is to use photographs of beneficiaries, magnetic faces. So research has shown that it's very effective. And then lastly, the idea of surprising the readers, not boring them. So you see the pictures where this old guy says, you cannot bore people into buying your product, you can only interest them in buying it. Next slide.
Yeah, so and perhaps just to add to what Jihan said in that particular slide, and I don't know how much we at the bank sort of think about people's emotions, when they're receiving or reading documents, but especially when, I think we engage a lot with corporate, institutions, whether it's a bilateral donor or a non-traditional. But at the end of the day, it's an individual person reading through a document, reading a pitch, or listening. And so, it's important to think through those types of emotions and that journey that the audience will be going through. Obviously, in some cases, there may be quite a fixed template that you're having to write a proposal, within. But then, we can obviously supplement that with our own documents and documentation, or other media forms to try and engage with that donor audience. So we just wanted to share with you now a couple of examples of case for support donor pitches that we've developed in collaboration with other teams. I don't know how clearly you guys can see this particular example from the African Water Facility, which was a pitch document or a case for support developed soon after the COVID outbreak. And it's really just to highlight the way that this was presented. It covers, I think, these three main questions, like why us, why now. Perhaps it doesn't cover so much the why you piece, so it doesn't target specifically, a particular donor. So that might be a follow-up document that you could develop. But obviously it talks about the facility and its work, talks about its track record. It talks about how, how the money can be used, the value for money proposition. There's some case studies, so bringing the kind of real impact to life. It talks about, we need your help with hitting our targets. So there's an ask in there, and it also breaks down some of the funding needs. So yeah, it'd be good to get perhaps some of your thoughts or feedback on that. If you can put that in the chat, and again, we can share some of these examples with you after the session. Over to you, Jihan.
So this is the second case for support, and you can see that it's different from the previous one. So less colors, no pictures, more text. It was drafted back in 2016, but I'll tell you why it's still a good case for support. Because it was customized to a donor and what they wanted at the time. It was a new sovereign donor that has just joined the bank. So they needed lots of information about the trust fund and how it operates at the bank. So they needed a paragraph on governance, a description of oversight committee, technical committee, coordination unit, and how trust funds are managed. So you see there on the right side of the page, a paragraph on governance, and then examples of ongoing TIA operations. So track record was important to them as well. And they needed text. And you see on the left side, FSDF at a glance. So the trust fund at a glance. It gives how the fund is managed, the target size, the investors, the minimum commitment, target area of intervention, instruments used, the geographic reach, eligibility. And then you have fund objective, fund strategy, and fund intervention areas. So, and to finish, we're making the ask. We are looking for donors and partners to scale up intervention and drive financial sector, etc., etc. We aspire to be long-term strategic, and we ask you for your support. So you see here the difference between these two cases for support. The essential, what we need to keep in mind is that in our case for support, we need three things reflected. Why you, the AFDB, why now, the urgency or else, and why them, why the donor. And then customize it depending on the work, the groundwork you've done in the identification qualification stage. Now we can move to the next slides. Yes.
Yeah, so this is another tool available to bank staff. It's part of our subscription or membership of the World Economic Forum, and it's called this Top Link platform. Now, in a way, this, we chose to put it in as a solicitation tool, but in some regards, it could be put in earlier on as well in the cycle or the process, because they have this platform where the bank can submit specific projects or even, a facility or a fund, and essentially it's a way of promoting that particular initiative to the WEF platform audience. I mean, and you can see those numbers there, that they have a very large audience, as I'm sure you can imagine. And then on the back of that, you can organize with their support, virtual meetings, conferences, etc. And I think in addition, they have a database that you can have a look at, their list of members, and it's segmented by, areas of interest, sectors, etc. So again, it could be a tool that you could use both at the identification stage, cultivation, and also at solicitation. So yeah, the bank has membership to it. Again, we can follow up with people on how to access it afterwards. So the next slide is the final or the fourth phase of the fundraising or the resource mobilization cycle. But in many ways, this stewardship phase is ongoing, and you can see in the little diagram in the top right of the slide that the stewardship really goes round and round. And the main point of it really is just to say that it's really important to keep maintaining and developing and evolving the relationship with those donors and partners. So it's around donor management, really, relationship management. I think at times we've seen that once a donor has contributed or made an investment to a fund, perhaps the focus on that relationship drops off a bit. And perhaps also, if we have a kind of formal agreement with that donor, you know, which says, you know, we have to do this report every 6 months or every year, we may just do that, you know, and keep it at that bare minimum. But really, we should always be looking at how we can continually update and engage with those donors, keep dropping them, you know, little bits of information, little videos, highlights of success stories, and even when things aren't going well, you know, making sure that they're up to date with that, so that it doesn't all come up at one, you know, big annual meeting and sort of blow up. So I think, you know, making sure that we're going a little bit beyond the kind of the formal agreement, and making sure that we're really you know, maintaining that relationship as much as possible. This is also really key because you know, the relationship that one team or one fund has with a particular donor will impact how the rest of the bank has or is able to have a relationship with that donor and the ability to raise funds from them. So, you know, when you're good stewardship, good relationship management, you know, has implications far beyond your own individual relationship and project. Okay, next slide for you, Jihan.
Yes, so in practice, it means acknowledgement, recognition, reporting, and ongoing engagement. You see in the right side of the screen, acknowledgement mean thank you emails, calls, welcome letters. Recognition, you can think of an award during the AAF. Reporting, so it means sending your reports, annual report, videos, and ongoing engagements. So again, emailing, phone calls, personal note from the VP or the president thanking them. I said that already, invitation to recognition events, awards at major AFDB events, hard copy of annual reports, social media, etc. It's all about that. And you see in the right side that it's well organized, and that's how you should organize your activities. But that's we will show you in the next slide further down the line. And then the next slide, trust fund testimonials. We have two trust funds coordinators that have accepted to share their experience and tell us what they do in each of the 4 stages. I think the first one is Alistair, the water facility coordinator, right?
Yeah, thanks. So Fatma, could you let Debjyoti have sort of unmute him, please?
Yeah, if you could please raise your hand.
Hand, yeah.
Okay, Deb, if you raise your hand, and then we can give you the.
Thanks.
Okay. So just to introduce, Debjyoti works on the Africa Water Facility, working on business development. And I've been working with him and the AWF team, yeah, really for the last sort of 18 months, 2 years. But they've developed a resource mobilization strategy. They've also developed supporting documents, as you saw earlier on. So Deb Debjyoti is just going to talk us through a little bit how they approached their process, see how much it aligns to what we've presented, and then yeah, we can discuss further. So Deb, over to you. And thank you for joining.
Thank you, Alasdair. Thank you, everybody, and good afternoon. I think you can hear me, Alasdair?
Yes, yeah, well.
Okay, thank you very much.
You can turn on your video as well if you wish.
Oh, I don't want to take the risk because of internet bandwidth.
Okay.
Yeah. In case of AWF, let me give a little background first. As a special fund, donors finance the strategy and resources are channelized in the basket fund. The first replenishment conference was conducted in 2006. Since then, AWF mobilized about 160 million euro. So far, AWF had two earlier strategies with project preparation, water knowledge, and water governance. The current strategy included catalytic investment, and immediately after that, we received about euro 12 million in the basket fund for sanitation projects. We have one resource mobilization strategy paper that was prepared in the year 2018. And as per that, the management went for some resource mobilization activities and donors engagement, and we received a good response out of that. And currently we are revising our strategy and our target plan for the next 5 years, or say 4 years up to 2025, is about 60 million, out of which some commitments are on the pipeline, about 30 million due to the resource mobilization drive what we had during 2019 and 20, and rest 30 million we are in the process of mobilizing. So now talking about what we have seen in the presentation, and thank you for this good presentation and these three links, what you have said, this DevEx and Trust Fund Finder and the World Economic Forum Top Link platform. Really, those will be useful, I think. So let me talk about this engagement with donors. This is basically throughout the year what we do. And recently, what we have already started, that is a monthly call with one of our donors, that is Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So we discuss every month where our vice president presents and our team presents there, and we discuss all the projects and upcoming opportunities and our strategies and works, how they are going on. Even our director also shares some of the strategies and works, as well as planned activities for the coming months. So this is how we engage with the donors. This is one example of that. Second example is that we really, in case of AWF, we really start the engagement process during the preparation of the strategy. Right now, we are going through the midterm review and revision of AWF strategy. And at this specific stage, we are engaging with our donors and partners. This is basically through the development process of the strategy, where we conducted a number of key informant interviews, as well as stakeholders consultations. And we conducted 2 workshops on SWOT analysis as well as theory of change. Then we shared our strategy with the donors for their reviews and recommendations. So it basically shows that where the donors' areas of interest. And let me tell you, some of the donors are really very proactive. They really advised that where we should focus in our strategy, and accordingly we have revised our strategy. This is how we engaged with the donors. And some more challenges are there. That is, the water department is having 3 trust funds. That is African Water Facilities, Rural Water Supply Sanitation Initiative, and Multi-Donor Water Partnership Program. So in this case, the challenge is associated with the duplication and overlapping mandates of the initiatives under the department, and that really creating some challenges in resource mobilization activities. So it is decided that these 3 trust funds should be integrated together, and AWF strategy has been getting enlarged. And one more comment on these presentation is that result reporting every 3 months, it is difficult for trust fund like us, because to get the results in 3 months time, every 3 months time, it's really difficult. And one more comment, that 80-20, in our case, it's almost 90-10 or maybe more than 90. These 80-20, 5% of topmost 20% of the donors offers 80%. In our case, it is more than 90%. So these resource we have some donors mapping exercise we conducted, and we use that result or report in case of developing our strategy. And again, we went to the donors as per that, and we broadened our, we are trying to broaden our donors base. Right now, we have 17 donors in the basket fund. And obviously, certain other challenges are also there that if time permits, we'll discuss later on. Thank you, Alasdair, if you have any question further.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Deb. That's really helpful. And I think just picking up on a few of your points, I think hearing about these monthly calls with Gates and having the VP present is useful to know. And certainly something, it may not be realistic with all donors, but certainly something to think about. I think the point about getting donors engaged as you design a strategy, the fund strategy or the project strategy, again, is a really good way of cultivating the relationship, but also, as you say, getting to understand the interests of those donors. What you said about the consolidation of the funds, again, there are obviously many reasons for consolidating these 3 funds, but one of them is to help the bank and help the water team fundraise, right, and create perhaps a clearer and a more articulate case for support. So I think those are really useful examples. Okay, so I think we'll leave that there. If anyone has questions on that, pop them in the chat, and then we have AK. I think Jihan, you'll do the next intro.
Hello, AK, are you able to connect?
Yes, hi, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, very well. So Abdelkader is the partnership coordinator for Making Finance Work for Africa. It's a partnership to promote financial sector development in Africa. And I'll let you, Eka, to present Making Finance Work for Africa, and then what you do at each of the 4 stages. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jihan, for giving me the opportunity to share my experience with our fundraising. Perhaps maybe it's worth pointing out at the beginning that our experience with fundraising might be a little bit different than the other trust funds and special funds that are with us today, mainly due to the nature of our initiative and how we are constituted. But I'm sure there are a lot of takeaways that will be useful. So I hope that's the case. Maybe just for context, Making Finance Work for Africa is a partnership initiative, and it has always been that way. And so it was born really under the premise that strengthening financial sector in Africa requires efficient cooperation between different stakeholders, including governments, donors, development partners, and the financial sector stakeholders, really to substantially leverage individual contributions. And so this initiative was really welcomed by the then G8. That was back in 2008, with representatives from Germany, France, UK, USA, Sweden, the European Union, African Development Bank, and the World Bank. They all confirmed their support back then. Of course, we have since evolved over the years, and donors have come and go. But really the premise, our DNA as a moderator, a facilitator for better communication, coordination between donors to avoid fragmented delivery, has always been there. And we did that throughout the years through creation of donor working groups around specific issues in the financial sector. And so a lot of these donors were actually actively involved in our work program. And because of this partnership approach, really, it was really helpful. I mean, the engagement with our donors with our current donors wasn't really an issue. Sometimes, not necessarily the individuals who are sitting in these board meetings would participate, but the institutions that they represent do participate. And so, there's always been continuous engagement. Our governing board, we call it the supervisory board, they meet twice a year. They're the ones who approve the strategy, our vision, and then we have an executive committee that they meet an additional, 4 times a year. And we do these quarterly calls with our donors to update them and, just to have a quick catch up. Perhaps it's important to mention that we are a membership-based organization, so they are membership contributions, and these membership contributions do depend according to the nature of the organization. If they're a multilateral, bilateral organization, they do provide a higher contribution. If it is a philanthropic organization, they have a different membership fee. If it's a private sector organization, and we do look for private sector organizations, and they have a different membership fee. And we do operate in 3-year strategic cycles, and 3 years because we try to sort of match the cycle of our donors. But that's always been debated inside. But when it comes to the strategy, just like my previous colleague mentioned, they've been consulted throughout in the development of the strategy, and not just the strategy, but also the progress reviews that we do, in a sort of every year and a half or every 2 years, the mid-year progress review. We do make sure that our donors, and not just our donors, but also other potential organizations that we have been engaging when are consulted, and to check. It's really like a checkup to see how do they see our services, how do they see our organization, is it meeting their expectations. So this is something that we do as well. When it comes to sort of the other thing that we do also, and that's also clearly articulated in the strategy, is we have a value proposition. So when a donor joins a partnership, that comes with certain benefits and privileges that others will not have, and we try to articulate that in our strategy. For example, they have exclusive access to some of our events. They participate in our networks. There's an opportunity to do bespoke research pieces, on-demand activities, and also even marketing their initiatives and projects. We do offer sort of a spotlight in our newsletters that we send out to our subscribers. So things like that is also very, very helpful when it comes to engaging. When it comes to trying to attract new donors, I have to say, you know, one of the things that's been really, really helpful is our current donors. They've time and time again have introduced us to different donors, you know, this is particularly important because, you know, they're always engaged with each other and around, so for example, I mean, I can give an example. The European Investment Bank have introduced us to the European Commission, and we have since been engaging with them around the specific topics in the financial sector and trying to get them on board the partnership. So this is something that's been really helpful, and it's important to remember that, you know, a lot of these donors, they talk between each other, and so, you know, it's important that, you know, the point that was made on stewardship is really important because you know, these are you know, not only it's important to maintain this personal relationship with individuals, but it's also important to also try to build this relationship with other individuals within the organization as well, because not only do they talk between donors, but they also talk within the organization. So it's important to maintain that level of relationship. And finally, what I should add is, you know, part of our strategy has been to look beyond traditional donors and try to bring on board African member organizations. And this is a deliberate thing that we want to do. It's encouraged by our donors. The idea is to, you know, to bring this sense of uniqueness, strengthen sustainability of the partnership, but also to enhance our reputation as an inclusive and impartial platform. And our approach there has, in fact, the African Development Bank has been really helpful in that a lot of these institutions, for example, Afrexim Bank, AFDB has a board seat in these African DFIs, and so that was sort of the direct channel. They usually have a direct relationship with the presidents of these institutions, and so we would use that channel to pitch our membership drive when we want to bring on board these African DFIs or African institutions. So I think, yeah, I'll stop there. I hope that's helpful.
Apologies, my computer is slow. Thank you very much, Abdelkader. So interesting that you said you have quarterly calls with your donors, catch-ups. So that's part of your stewardship. You also have donor working groups around specific issues. I remember you have one on pension funds, another one on financial inclusion. So that's very interesting. And that your donors are involved in your working group. And then you said something very interesting, that you have different membership fees. So I suppose you have different offerings to different segments. So you've done that exercise of segmenting your donor base. Yeah, so that's very interesting. Thank you so much, Abdelkader, for sharing your experience. Now, I think we may go to the next slides, unless my colleagues Roderick and Alistair wants to comment on the two testimonials.
Just to say, I've tried to respond to some of the questions in the chat. I think that because we still have a few slides to get through, and we have 25 more minutes, let's perhaps keep going, and then we can stop at the end for any other questions. But keep putting things in the chat box, and we can keep responding. Thanks.
Yeah. So the third part of this presentation is the resource mobilization strategy. It's a key document. Why? Because it clearly explains how you will achieve your goals. It identifies who is doing what, when, and to achieve which outcome, including which potential funders you're going to approach, how much you plan to ask from each one, who from your organization will make the ask, when the approach will be made, think about parliamentary budget discussions. What resources you will use or require, think about budget. And then it also sets benchmarks for evaluating and monitoring your fundraising activities. So 3 things. We'll show you a table of contents, Alistair.
Yeah, so as Jihan mentioned, we going through the cycle, the process, those are really, it's the process that we go through. So now what we're seeing on this slide is how you bring that all together into a more coherent strategy document or plan that's actually going to be your tool, your overarching tool to go and implement your resource mobilization strategy. And a lot of this will obviously, touch upon and include what we've already discussed. The main thing, perhaps just to highlight on this table of content, is the first line A, the vision, mission, and objectives, which really relates to your case for support, really, and your actual, what are you trying to achieve in terms of your project or your program, or perhaps your trust fund, and being really clear and articulate about that. Because it's very difficult to then go and do the subsequent activities, like doing your donor analysis, doing your mapping, etc., if you don't know what you're trying to raise your funds for, right? And so making sure that you spend the time articulating that and fleshing that out, I think is really important. And I think Deb from the AWF team, referenced that, designing the strategy of the overall project or fund is really important up front. So the rest of the table of content, this is what we'll talk through in the next few slides. And again, these are templates that we can share with you afterwards, so that you can actually use them with your work.
Yeah, and if I may add, why it's important to have a snapshot of the table of content, because each point is interrelated. So first you have vision, mission, objective, you need to be clear about it. And then you need to do a research, fundraising audit, or reality check. There are a bunch of analyses, as you see. And then when you have that audit, from that audit, you're able to come up with fundraising objectives based on the audit. And once you have the objectives, you're able to come up with strategies, fundraising strategies, or fundraising options. And after that, tactics, or another synonym is activities to reach the goals and to implement the strategies, and then schedule budget and monitoring. Next slide. Yeah, Alistair.
Yeah. No, so I think people will be familiar with a kind of steeple analysis. I think sometimes it's the pestle analysis. So really trying to understand what macro environmental factors could impact your ability to mobilize funds, and making sure that you're taking that into consideration as you then go into your your other analyses and doing your donor mapping, etc. I think we're all aware of, for example, different political changes, how that can impact our ability to mobilize funds. The election of one particular president or prime minister in one country can impact our ability to raise funds from one particular donor country, and often there are different trends. Whether particular donors are interested in gender or whether in climate change, etc., depending on the external environment. Yeah. Over to you.
This slide or this analysis is about competitors and collaborators. Essential. So this is again just a tool, a template you can use to facilitate your analysis. Horizontally, you have competitors, strategies, performances, and practices. Then you have another column, key learning for key learning, and another one for opportunity, threats, opportunity and threat with the. And basically, I'll provide an example here. Let's say that your competitor is the World Bank. You want to fundraise, you want to target foundations, okay? And your competitor is the World Bank. This is what you found in your analysis, because the World Bank has 100 foundations, has a clear corporate objective, it has a strategy on targeting foundation. It has even a director for philanthropic foundations. So key learning, raising capital from foundation requires a clear engagement strategy and endorsement by the highest authority in the organization. Our research has shown that the World Bank presidents made it a priority. So they were in calls at 8 a.m. with CEOs of global foundations, pitching their initiatives and the World Bank in general. Next, opportunities, threats. There you, on the opportunity access, whether it's a priority, then invest the adequate resources. So you've got the idea, right? You identify your competitor and then you research their strategies, performances, practices. You get the key learnings and then you identify opportunities and threats. The next analysis, Alistair, you were going to do this one.
Yeah, so again, and I think to an extent, a lot of these analyses can link to one another and slightly overlapping. But this particular one drills down a little bit more into the market analysis. And what we mean by that is the market of that particular funding avenue. So for example, if we're really wanting to drill down more into the, let's say, the philanthropic space for a particular area, sector, we might start off by trying to look at what the overall picture is of philanthropic giving, globally, try and understand what the opportunity might be there. Then look at, how does that philanthropic giving relate to, other or wider official development aid, so that we can see it in relation, and then perhaps understand whether, how big the opportunity is. We then might want to kind of segment or look at whether those philanthropies are from a particular country. Obviously, we know that US foundations really dominate the philanthropic space. They work in similar ways, but obviously there's huge other philanthropic giving as well. Think about the Gulf donors. There's obviously European philanthropies, and obviously there are philanthropies on the continent as well. So this sort of step or phase of the analysis is really just to dig down a little bit more into the market of that donor potential donor revenue stream, understand what the opportunities are, and what potentially the challenges are or the threats to that revenue stream. Over to you, Jihan.
When it's done, another analysis is internal. So you look at your portfolio, your net income, number of your donors, the grant range, new participants, your repeat participants, if any. And then once this is done, then you look for reasons for trend. For example, you look at how you communicate with your existing donors, what resources you have, how many staff members you have, processes at the AFDB or in your department or within your secretariat. And then the product that you offer your prospects or your current donors. So internal analysis is about analyzing how prepared you are to target new donors. And the next one is SWOT analysis.
Yeah, so you'll all be familiar with the SWOT analysis. Again, it incorporates perhaps different elements of the previous analyses that we presented. You can either use the SWOT analysis just to explore and identify your own organization's strengths, weaknesses, etc., or perhaps just of that particular fund or facility that you're working on. Or you could look at it and sometimes people say the strengths and the weaknesses piece just as the internal reflection, and then the opportunities and threats is more of an external analysis. So again, you can look at it in different ways, but I think the main point is that when you identify these different issues, it's thinking about, okay, what do we need to do in terms of concrete activities to take advantage of these strengths or build on these strengths, address these weaknesses? How do we take advantage of the opportunities and how do we reduce these threats? So this information we'll be using to then flesh out our activities and our plan further down the line.
Yes. And once your audit is done, now you identify your objectives. For example, we took an example of philanthropic foundations here. See, AFDB, this is an objective. AFDB to secure 5%, which is 125 million USD per year over 10 years of the global philanthropic flows into Africa. So this is our overall objective. And where did the numbers come from? They came from the audit. So OECD statistics, we found that 24% of the global philanthropic flows amounting to 7.8 billion went to Africa. And we decided that we want to capture a percentage of philanthropic foundations flows, just 5%. And when you make the calculations, it's 125 M. Another indirect objective is to mitigate the risk of being too dependent on traditional pool of sovereign donors versus going to foundations. So I hope this is clear, but please ask your questions. The bottom line is that objectives need to be quantitative, so numbers. You need to do calculations based on research on your audit.
Yeah, and I think just to add on that, the objective should be, the SMART rule, try and make it specific, measurable, realistic, so you're also not just setting overly ambitious and targets that based on nothing. And that's something that I think, I've seen both within and, with other organizations is targets which are set and they're not really based on any concrete and robust analysis and evidence of that opportunity. So this next section, it's a bit confusing because it says strategies again, but essentially it's saying it's the next step in starting to identify what specific activities or approaches are we going to take in order to reach our target, our fundraising target and objective. And that can be done through a number of ways, and we'll talk through them: the market direction, segmentation, positioning. It's not necessarily either or of these. We could do them all together. But Jihan will talk through the market direction piece.
Yeah, so one of the fundraising strategies is this one, market direction, using an Unsoft metric. Again, you can use it to clarify ideas. Horizontally, we have the offerings. So all your fundraising activities, tactics, and products. i.e. emails, conferences, sending letters. And vertically, you have donors, so existing, new, right? So if you look at the top left side, market penetration, here our strategy is what? If you decide it's a strategy, is to focus on existing donors with existing activities, tactics, and products. So I'm gonna focus on retaining the two philanthropic foundations I have in my portfolio, Gates and Rockefeller. And I'm gonna continue using the same tactics and products, periodic calls, invitation to events, etc. Or I may decide to focus on the same two donors, but then expand my offering. So develop new activities for the existing donors, yeah? And this is the right side, offering development. Another strategy is to target new donors and use existing tactics, products, and activities. So new donor could be Calvert Foundation, and I'm using the same products and tactics, i.e. Reporting, periodic calls, invitation to events. Or I may decide to do new donor, new product, tactic, and activities. So I'm developing new activities and fundraising techniques for a new foundation each year, for example. I hope this is clear. It should be clear, but feel free to ask your questions in the chat box, and we can go to the next fundraising strategy, which is segmentation.
Yeah, thanks, Jihan. So I was just responding to one of the questions in the chat. So again, another approach, we've touched on this already, and it's linked to the identification phase that we presented in the cycle. So really, what you want to do, and again, that pyramid, you start off with a big, long list of prospect donors. But obviously, you can't just reach out to 100, different donors. You need to try and segment them, categorize them as much as possible. So, if you decide that you want to, look at, let's say, foundations as one category of donors, you then want to come up with some criteria to try and segment them and see how relevant they are to what you're trying to do. So, are they interested in Africa? How much do they usually give to multilateral development organizations? Some foundations, maybe are more used to giving to NGOs, etc. And then the idea is that you go from having a long list perhaps to a short list within that particular segment of donors to which you then target. And then that then helps you work out how to develop your more targeted communication tools, your case for support, etc. Okay, next.
And the last strategic option is positioning. So why is your fund program best positioned to deliver impact? That you will discover at the audit stage. It's always vis-a-vis competitors. Maybe you have something that the World Bank doesn't have. Maybe it's the geographic footprint. Maybe you have something that startups don't have. It's about branding. It's about unique attributes and track record that must be part of messaging and communication to donors. So examples are, but these are corporate examples. You need to think about examples for your individual trust funds or initiatives. But the corporate examples are, for example, large footprint, country offices, deep relation with sovereign donors, convenient powers, ability to replicate scale-up successful projects on the continent, ability to blend foundation, ability to blend grant with our own account financing, And perhaps that we are almost operating all SDG sectors, etc., etc. And the third thing I want to highlight is positioning of your product and activities is also a strategy. For example, if you get Adesina called the CEO of a foundation or the minister of finance of a country, then you have positioned your product, you have positioned your fund high in the hierarchy, right? Same for activities. If you organize a work conference, for example, and you've invited ministers to speak, then you've positioned well your conference. So you get the idea. Now we finished with the audit. We did the audit, we did the objective, we did the strategies, the 3 strategies. Now it's the tactics, i.e. the activities. And here you can use this framework. You're not obliged to use this framework, but you could. It will ease your work. It's called the 7 P's framework. Vertically, you have product, promotion, price, place, people, process, physical evidence. And horizontally, you have the activities that you will develop to achieve your objectives. For example, activity 1, arrange calls between Adesina and the CEO of the 10 foundations that you have identified in your audit. Product is what? Is 10 separate courtesy calls. Promotion is how you're gonna promote it, internal to each foundation. Price, maybe it's 1 staff time plus the phone call to the US. Place is gonna be conference call, Zoom or via phone. People, 10 CEOs, FDB presidents, staff who's gonna coordinate, probably the manager or firm or director. And then the process, you need to list the process here to ease your work. So memo to the president about the plan of engaging the CEOs as part of a fundraising plan tactic, getting approval, contacting the CEO of the foundation, coordinating the calls, taking notes and calls for action, follow up on the different actions, and press release. We want details. And I'll tell you why in the next slide. And physical evidence, conference call, report, press release. So you get the idea. Activity 1, then activity 2, same thing, activity 3. You can have as many activities as you want, but it depends, of course, on your capacity to implement them, on your budget and time. Next slide, it's the schedule. So here you put your activities that you had in that we have in the previous slides, yeah. And you need to have a schedule, 1 year, 5 years, depending on your capacity, but at least 1 year schedule of how you're gonna reach your goals. For example, we say that one of the tactics is arrange a conference call between the CEOs of foundations, the 10 foundation and Adesina. Then you list what you need to do. So memo to the president, contact the CEOs, and then you list call number 1, date of call number 1, who is responsible for this, call number 2, date, who's responsible, etc., etc. Then you have summarized conference calls, date and how many duration, how many days it will take to do the summary, and then how many days it will take to do the follow-up, and then press release, and who's responsible for the press release. Is it the comms? It is your colleague John or you, and so on. So you do the same thing for activity number 2, number 3, number 4, etc. The idea is to have as many details as possible, to have a schedule that you need to follow with start date, end date, duration, and who's responsible. And then Alistair will walk us through the budget, which is the last or before the last one on our table.
Yeah, so just quickly, because we only have 1 minute, but normally it's useful to understand and work out what budget is going to be needed in order to implement your fundraising or resource mobilization action plan or strategy. You know, so i.e. the list of activities that Jihan just presented, how much do you need in order to implement them, both in terms of human resources, whether it's event budget, developing materials, all that kind of stuff. And one reason why it's important, obviously, we often, present to the board or whoever to try and cover that cost. It's obviously important that we provide good detail, but it also might enable us, or it does allow us to then say what the return on that investment might be. So if we invest, X amount to implement this resource mobilization strategy in a really thorough way, like properly resourced, then we're confident that we will meet our fundraising target, our resource mobilization target, Y amount, and then we can obviously present, what the return. And again, that's not something I always see us doing, but I think it's certainly, you look at fundraising campaigns outside, that's outside the bank. It's definitely something that is always there. Okay, Jihan, is that the last slide?
I think it's the
We're gonna
last
end it there, right?
Yes, the last slide. Apologies, it has taken a lot of time, and we wanted to discuss with you, to exchange with you, but feel free if you wanna chat, send your comments over chat. Alistair has been answering them. Maybe Roderick can take from here. Maybe Roderick, you can take some questions from the audience if you raise your hand. I don't know if, yeah.
Happy to, Gian. Listen, thank you. That was a rich presentation. And I hope that everyone gets the point that this is not just a, let us pick up the phone and call a friend and ask for money, or pick up the phone and call, someone who's not a friend and ask for money, that there's a process behind this. I think that there are a couple things that jumped out for me during the presentation that could be myths of fundraising. One myth of fundraising is that it's only about who you know. That if I know someone, if I have a contact at the Gates Foundation or the Rockefeller Foundation, that I'm going to be able to call that person and we will get money. False. There's a lot of structure and strategy that goes behind this. And there's probably a number of other myths that we may have at the bank about fundraising, whether it's committing resources, the proper resources. I saw questions on the chat that were asking, well, do we need to commit resources? Yes, yes, and yes. As well as, what role can firm play versus what role the sectors play. This needs to be primarily led by your team, and firm can assist. So with that, Jihan, I know that we're out of time, but if there are any burning questions, maybe we can take one or two if people want to put them in the chat room, or are there any questions that you want to further expand on, Alistair, from the chat, or Jihan?
Hi, Roderick.
Bushaid.
Yes, I have a quick question. During this phase of discussion, early discussion with the donors, say, this early romance, how can you make the donor to trust enough the bank into the reporting system? I'm talking from the angle of making uniform reporting system for the bank, which becomes a burden for you, for the fund manager also. To make this, that should be part of the discussion also, to trust into the system of reporting, the fiduciary aspects also of the bank, audit and stuff like that, so that you don't end up with as many reporting styles and systems as donors. When that comes into play during the discussions?
So let me take a stab at it, and then Alistair and Jihan, feel free to come in. Listen, I think it is up to us as the bank to get people comfortable with what we're going to be providing. And unfortunately, past donor experiences come into play. So if they've had a bad experience with the bank in terms of reporting previously, that's going to play into their level of confidence. And so we would need to, that is what I would call a friction point. And then we need to upfront show them why this is going to be different. Unfortunately, that may mean that some of the onus is on a particular sector to overcome what may be issues, broader issues at the bank. But it's about communication, and it's about being proactive and showing why this time will be different. Jihan or Alistair, you want to add to that?
Totally agree. I mean, Bushaib, you know, the bank is not perfect, and the World Bank and others are not perfect. You have to work with what you have, and the opportunity here is that you don't have focus on your project or your initiative or your trust fund. Make it look good, and work with what you have, the tools that you have. That's all I have to add to Rod's answer. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Karina?
Hi, thank you very much for a really excellent presentation, first of all. I thought it was really practical and helpful. Now, I have one concern in the bank, which we experience, is this internal competition within the bank. We are all going to the same donors, the water sector, energy sector, governance sector, and some of us more prepared than others. So how do we manage this process, and what is the role of firm in this process?
There are two roles. One, in an ideal world, Karina, we would have full line of sight before people go to donors. And it's because a badly prepared presentation reflects on the bank as a whole. In reality, that doesn't always happen. And again, this is, I guess I would put this in a bucket of another myth, which is that you can do this alone and that you don't need to coordinate things. It reflects, it's a huge reputational risk for the bank. And it looks bad, right? It looks bad on everyone, and it affects fundraising for the entire institution. If someone goes alone, is not coordinated, and it happens at other institutions as well. I mean, I was with an institution before where you didn't always have the best coordination, but we are trying to put in place a system, a CRM system, so that we can play a little bit the role of traffic cop a little better, and we know who is calling on which particular donors and when. But the short answer is it should be coordinated by firm, and that's the real goal, is so that the entire fundraising is maximized, as opposed to an individual going and calling directly on someone at a donor.
Just to add, can I add on that?
Go ahead, Alistair.
Yeah, so I think if let's say you're developing a resource mobilization strategy within a sector, within a team, and you come up with your list of donors, before ever contacting them, I would want to make sure, as the person who's developed that strategy, I would want to make sure that I know, what that existing relationship is like with the bank, right? Because I'm gonna look stupid if I reach out and then you have a kind of awkward conversation. So obviously, information flows are not always easy, but so reach out to firm, because firm manages relationships with existing donors, and then also within the complex that you're in. I think many times or frequently when we ask those questions to complexes saying, oh, but have you spoken to your, another team in your own complex to find out whether they've reached out, so I think the onus is on us. Yes, we're trying to get a system to help with this, but one system on its own is not going to help, because we still need to use that and input information into that system. But, make sure that we're talking to other colleagues within our own complex and with firm, and then hopefully that will reduce that risk as much as possible.
Let's, why don't we take one or two additional questions?
Ify, can I speak? This is Ify.
Yeah, go ahead, Ify.
Hi, hello everyone. Thank you for this. This is very, very useful. I've seen that I've missed a lot of steps that we need to retrace our own work processing. For the resource mobilization cycle, basically this slide that is on right now. So if we are at the acknowledgement, recognition, and reporting / ongoing engagement stage, and we haven't involved firm from 1 to 3, is it too late to come in now? And if we do bring in firm now, how do we make that, infusion so it doesn't look very awkward? Yes, let me keep it short that way. And Jihan, I'll follow up with you because I see, yeah, we have a lot. That's it.
Ify, what fund are you managing?
No, so it's not, it's an informal kind of setup where we approached a partner and they're helping us with a couple of projects. So it's not really a fund, but we call it sort of a proof of concept towards the launch of a fund. And that's how they say they want to work on it. So we have about 2 of them and they're just working on these various projects with us. If they're satisfied with the way we're going about it, the processes, the methodology, then we can now go into the full-blown fund process.
Wow, that's amazing. So you are definitely in the romance phase.
Oh, okay. Is that where we are? Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
I think so.
Even though they've committed to some projects already, they put in some money on some projects.
Oh, they did. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So remember, stewardship is ongoing. It's it's
yes,
an ongoing process.
Mm-hmm.
And it's great that that they commit to fund other projects. So that's what you want to get at.
Yes.
Repeat donors. That's amazing. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll follow up with you. Yeah.
So Ify, and I would just add, listen, it's never too late.
Okay,
I mean,
good.
the first stage is to admit that you have a problem, right? and then once that happens, then you can reach out and we're happy to engage. But I think what Jihan and Alistair have demonstrated is that it is an ongoing cycle. And so you may think that you're at stewardship, but you may actually be at cultivation. Right?
Okay, all right.
And it's always, as you know, I think, and as I said, it's always easier with the existing donors as opposed to, and you want to constantly be using this cycle to identify with existing donors, cultivate them on new ideas, solicit them with the knowledge, because the advantage that you have with an existing donor is you have airspace. I mean, you have time. They're warm, and you can ask them, so what are you thinking about this particular area? Or, I mean, it's so much easier than cold calling someone and asking them about themselves.
Right.
And then once you find that information, then you go back through the cycle, which I think is the power of the existing donors, having existing donors, and they know you already. So we're happy to do that.
So much.
And we haven't, I think Jihan and Alistair, we haven't talked about kind of the next stage, but maybe given that there are a number of recurring or broad questions, we're happy to do another session where we go deeper and get and answer kind of individual questions. I mean, today we didn't have enough time to do that, but we could envision something that's a bit longer and that's a bit more targeted towards specific areas of interest.
Yeah, sure.
One final question, and then I think we'll have to break.
I see Sheila.
Hi, Rod. Sheila.
Yeah, Sheila.
Hi, Sheila.
Hi, Rod. Hi, everybody. I'll keep it short. First, thanks, Jihan and Alistair, for the presentation. It certainly helps to clarify and help us manage the process and our presentations better. I have 3 quick questions, and it may have been answered, but I just want to put it out there. So my understanding is that firm does not have KPIs for resource mobilizations of the funds you support. And then with regards to coordinating, I think this has been raised. I think there's a case to be considered there in the sense that there are a lot of overlaps. So when we go to approach these donors, I'm just wondering, could there be like a roadshow or, so that, they can be approached, I don't know if it's at the beginning of the year, where they know that these are the funds that are aligned with their strategy. I think that came out in the presentation, that we need to appreciate what are the focus areas for the different funds. So we map that to, the funds that we have, so that we approach it both from the demand and supply side and maybe meet them in a more coordinated way. And then my third question is, some of our donors are quite active in the fundraising aspect. Is it okay for us to go on roadshows with them to solicit funds for our different facilities? I initially was of the impression that because we have a resource mobilization team, it would be more ideal to try and do that with the bank's team rather directly with the donors. So I need to know if this is okay. Thank you.
So Sheila, why don't we start with the last question? And again, I guess I'm not clear on in what case you would be going on a roadshow with a donor. Is the donor raising money?
Yeah, so maybe just to be specific, for the Gates Foundation, for example, they are quite hands-on. I think AK also mentioned, they want monthly meetings or every 2 months. But for example, because they also speak to a lot of donors, a good example is the G7 partnership, where they were able to help us get an additional $5 million. So they are quite active in that space in terms of selling the facilities they support.
Yeah.
Now, they do a lot of those introductions. So I think the question I have, is it okay for us to align our fundraising with them? Because initially I thought we should try and do it through the bank's mechanism. So
Yeah.
if that, yeah.
No. So listen, I think Gates is a unique animal, and Gates has often come to us and offered up their convening power, right? And I think that it should be accepted because it's intros, especially where they are investors in a fund like the fund that you're talking about. But it's something that needs to be coordinated, right? So Gates will have relationships with some of the same donors that the bank has relationships with, and so in that case, again, like you would coordinate any other call, you shouldn't shy away from having a couple different introductions, but it just needs to be coordinated. So I don't think there's no set rule that you can't go out to an event that Gates is hosting, especially if it's going to open up avenues for a set of donors that we may not have a relationship with.
Yeah. Can I mention something? You know why it is important to have a schedule, a fundraising schedule, and you need to stick to it. Otherwise, I'm sure further down the line, you'll have a couple of opportunities for roadshows with this donor, with the other donor. But if you have your schedule, you stick to it. Of course, you update it from time to time. Then you're probably you'll succeed more than if you go with the flow. That's my intake, I would say, on this.
So that's the first one, and Alistair, feel free to jump in anywhere here. On the second one about coordination, we used to do something called partnership roundtables, and it's something that we've talked about reinitiating, a little bit like an introduction. So bringing partners together to talk to them about the priorities of the bank. It's something that I don't think there's been a partnership roundtable, at least since I've been in firm over the last 3 years. And it's something that we should really consider. Certainly, it allows us to present the bank as opposed to individual funds going. So I think it's a good reminder, Sheila, and it's something that we can have a discussion around and figure out how to best coordinate something like that. I mean, we've done it.
Sorry. Okay, just a quick one. Maybe just on that point for emphasis. We did some roadshows this year with some of the EDs. And to be honest with you, this kind of came up, you know, a statement that you're so many of you, you know, all looking for money. And then they started mentioning some of the challenges, you know, like maybe the bank is slow in this or that, you know, so I think that coordinated approach in terms of, first of all, knowing their perception, the experiences they're having across the different funds, so that when we go in, we know what mitigations to put forward. Thanks.
Yeah. And I think it's certainly necessary with some of the foundations, because what they're asking for is pretty specific, the requirements, and we need to make sure that the bank is even ready to undertake some of those things, as you very well know, Sheila. I mean, you know, so the reporting and the engagement that it takes with a foundation is different than what we typically do with some traditional donors. And then to your final point about KPIs. Listen, our KPIs are to raise a global amount, but it has to come from individual funds, Sheila. And so we are, and you should feel that we are as incented to help and to support with individual funds as we are with this global number. Having said that, you know, there's no one that's going to be as focused on the fundraising for your specific fund as you, the coordinator. You know the needs, you know if you've gone through the process, you have much more information than we do on the specifics, the specific case, the specific universe of donors. And at the end of the day, you're going to be the technical specialist to answer many of the questions. What we can be helpful in is supporting that from a strategic standpoint and from a best practices standpoint. But again, I think that there's a bit of a misnomer sometimes. People come and say, can you firm go raise $30 million for us? Like that's not.
It's your title which throws people off.
Well,
so
yeah. So no, it's again, someone was saying that should we the sectors have resource mobilization people embedded within our complexes? The answer is yes. Right? People, systems, processes. We can help with processes. We can help with the systems. People, and the people to do the legwork around this have to be embedded in the sectors. And that was the idea. I think that was the idea of the DBDM in terms of decentralizing some of the resource mobilization. Listen, Alistair, any last words? Alistair and Jihan will give you the last words. And then we'll
Thanks,
close
Rod.
the session for
Thanks,
the
Rod, for your answers. Thanks.
No, you're welcome, Sheila.
No,
Jihan?
nothing, just to say thanks everyone. And yeah, it's just the start. You know, we've got through a lot of material. I think normally, you know, we would take a lot longer to get through this. So happy to arrange either a follow-up session for people who want to dig down into more detail, or just reach out to us. You know, I think we've already received some emails, so feel free to continue doing that. And we will post everything up online, which yeah, our colleague Fatma will do that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Alistair.
Also,
Jihan?
thank you all, and we'll organize a follow-up session once we discuss it internally. Thanks, and good luck fundraising, getting money for the bank.
Listen, let me just say a special thank you to Jihan and Alistair for pulling this session together, along with, sorry, along with the guest participants, AK and Dibby, is it, Alistair?
Deb.
Deb and Deb. Sorry
sure.
about that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
As well as Fatma, thank you for organizing it, and Felici for, even though we didn't see you, it's always helpful, the hard work that goes behind these things. With that, we'll sign off, and thanks everyone.
Thanks, guys. This was good.
Thank you.
Good luck fundraising.
Bye.
Thank you.
Hey, bye-bye. Thank you.